the budget speech will now be tabled on the 12th of March 2025. This, of course, following the unprecedented postponement. A short while ago, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana explained that the delay is to allow further discussions on some issues of contention. Godongwana was unable to table the 2025 budget due to what they say disagreements within the government of national unity. Let's now bring in Professor Ntsikelelo Breakfast and political analyst Bongani Mahlangu via video link to weigh in on these political developments. A very good afternoon to you both. Mr. Mahlangu, perhaps let's start with you. I mean, this is the first postponement of the budget speech in the history of democratic South Africa. The words unprecedented and uncharted waters have been repeated amongst most political parties today, including the EFF as well as the MK parties. In fact, EFF leader Julius Malema declared upon the speaker declaring this postponement that the government has collapsed. What do you make of the developments in the last 2 hours? Bongani, can you please unmute yourself? You muted. All right, let me see if I can get you in Professor Breakfast while Mr. Mahlangu just sorts out that audio there. But just pose really the same question to you. In the past 2 hours, of course, we've seen what has never happened in as far as budget speeches in this country in terms of the postponement. What do you make of everything that we've seen so far and heard?
Thank you very much, Munati, for having me, and good afternoon to Mr. Mahlangu. I'm not taken aback personally by the turn of events. To be honest, I saw it coming because throughout history, if you look at international best practices, many coalition arrangements, the disagreements normally are over the issue of budget around the world. Now, in this regard, you have, for instance, the ANC that believes, in my view, in a expansionary fiscal policy, basically, which is about, increasing government expenditure. It has always done that. That's why we've never had a problem, because the ANC in the past has been hegemonic. I'm addressing the issue that you raised, that this has never happened in the past. So it has happened at the moment because one party dominance is a thing of the past, right? So on the other hand, the flip side of the coin is that you have a DA that believes in fiscal discipline, which is, reducing the government expenditure. Why? Because at the moment, we have budget deficit, right? So we spend more than what we have. So that has been a concern that you have to address the issue of debt. But I think the bone of contention is the issue of taxation. Whether you like it or not, Unati, if you have a plan, whatever you call it, NDP, medium-term development plan, for that plan to take off the ground, it must be aligned to budget, right? But the question is, where is the money going to come from? And I'm not saying that I'm arguing for this 2% increment. So the money has to come from somewhere, right? But I think there is a way out of this, because there is a forum for them to ventilate issues of conflict and so on. Even though we know that there are different understandings and interpretations regarding the statement of intent, which has a provision that they have to speak the same language before decisions are made.
And Mr. Mahlangu, let me bring you in. I understand your connection is now sorted out. I mean, just listening to Prof, who says he's not really that surprised that we are seeing these developments. But in as far as this being a significant moment for the GNU, particularly the DA and its power within this coalition, the GNU, Minister Kambuzo Chamveni earlier on talking about this postponement being a decision taken by cabinet and it's not an ANC versus DA moment. But what does this signal for the GNU going forward, especially when you consider that the area of contention here was an increase in VAT by as much as 2%? All right, we seem to not have your speaker still not working. Oh, there we have it. Continue, please.
Okay, I don't know what's causing this issue. However, if we take what the DA says, I'll remind you when the DA had their first press briefing to contest the Expropriation Act being signed into law, the bill being signed into law at the time. They said they would use two tools or instruments to frustrate the government to ensure that whatever they want to achieve gets achieved. The first one was that they would not support the adoption of the medium-term development plan. And the second one, they said they would not vote in support of the budget. So the hurdle of Expropriation Act was jumped somehow, but the instrument still remained in place to be used whenever it is necessary for them to be deployed. So here came the time for them to be used, but now the medium-term development plan was approved, was adopted by the Lekgotla and was adopted by the government in extension. But then the budget remained. So they did not agree with the 2%, hence then they opted not to support the budget. So that would have caused a great deal of problems. However, from the first question that you asked me, I wanted to refer you to the Public Financial Management Act, Section 27, subsection 1. And it was cited by the minister and cited by the DG. The laws of this country do make provision for a delay. It may be unprecedented in the context that it's the first in a democratic government for such a delay to take place, especially in this fashion. But it is accommodated in the legal framework of the country. Equally, the process of budgeting is an 18-month process, and the process is guided by the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act. And that's the fiscal framework that they were talking about. So the Act does give guidance on how things need to happen. For political parties then to say that the government is collapsing, by extension the country is collapsing because of a rescheduling that there is a provision for in law, I think for me that is just politicking. So even the 12th of March can still be extended into the beginning of the financial year in April, because the law does give provision for such to happen. The unfortunate part is that it will delay government programs and projects. It will also delay provincial governments, because certain things need to happen at national in order to trigger Section 27, subsection 2 of the PFMA as to what needs to happen in our provinces. But regardless, it is accommodated in our legal framework.
Prof, let me bring you back. I mean, just listening to what Mr. Mahlangu is saying, leading up to the budget, we also heard that the proposal to increase VAT was intended to plug holes in the education budget and support social spending. But in the main, this proposed tax increase was opposed by unions and Labour. Just given the fact that this was going to go ahead today, is this a tone-deaf government, considering just the implications of what that would have potentially meant?
Well, normally before a budget is tabled to Parliament, there's a process of interacting with different stakeholders. But at the same time, unfortunately, you can't be all things to all people. I mean, you can't make everyone happy, right? But I think the most important thing in my view is that if you have a plan, you want to promote development, you believe in a capitalist mode of a production with a human face, you have to have resources to make that take off the ground. And I think maybe they don't agree amongst themselves in terms of where is the money going to come from. But I know also that the DA is not in support of expansionary fiscal policy. But my view is that putting the budget on hold, yes, I do appreciate the provisions that, you know, there are issues of accommodation, political accommodation for this kind of thing. But at the same time, we must remember that South Africa uses a parliamentary system, meaning that the executive reports to the legislative institution. Under normal circumstances, if the executive cannot pass a budget it must resign. That is in theory. I'm not sure if it is like that in practice. So I think this is a blow, though, to the GNU. I'm not saying that it will fall apart.
And just given that, those sentiments, Mr. Mahlangu, and as we conclude then our conversation, but just, given this reaction and given where we are in terms of, the country's fiscus, where do you think the Minister of Finance will now have to look, just given the public debt, the revenue shortfalls, because our understanding is that between now and just before the 12th of March, Cabinet will be meeting and will have to come to some form of an agreement.
All right, I will take you to what the government did last year to deal with the budget deficit. So they were very crafty. So they came up with two things, new things, or not necessarily new. One was budget creep. So they didn't adjust our tax brackets for inflation, knowing very well that our salaries will be adjusted for inflation, which means that a lot of people were pushed into the next brackets and they paid more tax. And the government then generated some revenue there. And then the second one was the taxing of the two-pot withdrawals. Then government generated some revenue there. So that was crafty because it didn't cause a lot of uproar in the public because a lot of people didn't even pick it up. So they maneuvered nicely there. So I'm expecting something along those lines here because the 2% was very obvious. And obviously, it's not even consistent with the medium-term development plan priority number 2, which speaks to reducing the cost of living. So obviously the resistance would have been very high. So what I expect now is that they're going to look into similar strategies of the last financial year, or rather the last time the speech was made, and see how they can maneuver in the gaps. But also, if that fails, it will then go down to budget reprioritization, meaning cutting certain programs, or rather cutting the 3-year budgeting, the midterm budgeting for that. So that means reducing the baseline in order to put money in certain areas of government, especially social spending, which takes about 60% of our resources. So I believe if they were to apply their minds, they will be able to mobilize the resources without necessarily having to borrow from the domestic or foreign capital markets.
All right, let me thank you both for your time and, of course, your reaction this afternoon. Professor Ntsikelelo Breakfast there, as well as political analyst Bongani Mahlangu joining us.